Hello, this webinar is on U.S. payroll year-end processing. In this webinar, we'll be going over bonuses, year-end adjustments, and the printing and filing of W-2s. There are separate webinars as far as the current year tax rate changes, and also on 1099 reporting and 1095-C reporting. So this one will focus mainly on, as mentioned, bonuses, year-end adjustments, and running your W-2s. So let's start off with bonuses. When it comes to running a bonus pay, there's two ways for the system to automatically handle the federal tax and state tax calculation on the bonus. One is it's an aggregate method, so it just adds to the normal pay and it just annualizes it out, applies the tax tables to it, and calculates the tax. The other way is to use the supplemental rate, which basically takes a flat 22% tax. Regardless of the amount, it's going to take a flat 22%. So how you define that is in the setup of the payroll. Under Payroll Profile and Customize, go down to your earning code, and it is this flag here that says if earning used to pay supplemental wage. And each state, or most states that have state withholding, also have a supplemental rate as well for their state too. It's generally much less. It'll be 3%, between 3 and 6% usually. So for federal, as mentioned though, it takes a flat 22% tax. So whether or not you want it to use the supplemental rate really depends on the amount of the bonus. If they're smaller bonuses, you don't want it really to use the 22% rate probably. So you may want to actually have separate bonus earning codes. One for larger bonuses where you haven't used the supplemental rate, and then one for smaller bonuses where you don't check it and it just annualizes it out like a normal pay. Couple things if you're going to process a bonus on its own, if you want to do it in its own pay run. When you set up that pay run, you can go in here and say uncheck all deductions if you don't want any of your miscellaneous deductions to come off. So it'll still take taxes in that, but none of these other deductions will take place if you uncheck them. And sorry, if we go back into that screen. Also, when running that pay, if you don't want it to calc other payment per pay, so that's something that can be set up in the employee's payment screen, or you don't want it to do additional tax if they have that set up in their taxes screen, those two flags you would check in that instance. If it is like a Christmas bonus and you only want to deduct Social Security and Medicare tax, what you can do is when you get to the point of calculating taxes and deductions, there is a flag here to calc FICA only, so that eliminates your federal and state withholding taxes and just calculates FICA on that amount. So again, you can only use that if you're doing the bonus on its own run. You couldn't do it in conjunction with a regular pay run. It has to be in its own pay period processing for that. For year-end adjustments, ideally the best thing for year-end adjustments is to try to get those in before the last pay of the year. That way you can just let the system tax it as it needs to be, and you don't have to worry about grossing up the pay or anything like that. If it's the case where you don't have the information until after the last pay of the year, you can still load it into their file obviously, but at that point you probably, if there is tax implication to it, like if they still owe Social Security, they haven't maxed out on it, you will need to gross up that amount to account for the taxes so that it nets out. So for those type of items to get in there where you just want it in there really for taxing purposes, so a good example is group term life insurance. What I would do is under Payroll Profile, I would set up both an earning and a deduction code for it. So for example, here I've set up group term life, D24, and then I've also set up an E code. And it doesn't have to be the same number, it's just any earning code, any E code. and I've linked it to that deduction D24. So now if I'm processing the pay, if I'm doing it before my last pay of the year, when I'm in new combined entry, I would just put in the E14 code, put in the dollar amount. When I calculate the taxes, it'll figure out the taxes, and then it'll take the amount out automatically as a deduction. So I don't have to key in the deduction. I don't have to put it in the employee's file. I just have to link it in here, and it'll happen automatically when you calculate the tax. Again, if you're loading it in, then you would put it in manually then at that point. So to load items in, again, this is for after the end of the year. Easiest place to do it is just to come into special and load in pay history. Anything you do in load in pay history will not impact the general ledger. So if you do want the GL impacted, you'd have to do a journal entry as well in addition to this. But anything done in here will get it so it reflects on your quarterly tax reports and also on your W-2. So when you come in here, it'll ask if you want to update the year to date. You want to make sure it says the correct year. It pulls the year based on the year that's specified in your payroll profile. And so you always want to say yes. If it's not the correct year, go back, change your profile, then come back in again and say yes to update because you need to update both the history and the year to date. You can give it any pay period you want. I wouldn't use one of your actual pay ending dates, but any other date. Pull up your employee. Group union, generally I wouldn't choose opening balance. Choose one of the other options if they have union codes or a 401k agreement or something. And it'll come up with all zeros. Then you'll just click on edit. Go down to your earning code. So let's say it's just $100. So I put that in under the E code. And then if there's taxes, you'd put in the taxes. So again, in this case, you would actually gross it up, but for now, we'll just put in it like this. And then in here, put the same amount as the original group term life. Now it's showing in net pay in here. Again, if we had grossed it up, I wouldn't have the net pay at this point, but it's not going to hurt anything in here because, again, nothing's posted into the general ledger. This is just getting the details in there. But if they have not reached the limit for Social Security, anything you put under the E code, you have to add that same amount at the bottom to M02, Social Security wages. Alright, so whatever I put in the E code, I put into the M02 code as well. If they reach the limit, if they've reached the limit for Social Security, then you don't have to do that. It's only when they have not that you would put that in there. And then you just say OK and OK, and then that stores it. And you're able to come back in here if necessary and pull the record back up again to make changes if anything was done incorrectly at that point. Another item that comes up quite often now that's to input at the end of the year on the W-2 is the company cost or the total cost of health coverage for the employee. And generally that's the employee portion may be tracked in Jonas, but the employer part is not. So if that's the case, you need to get it in at the end of the year so to show on the W-2. So for something like that, again, I would do a similar sort of thing. You're going to set up a code for it. But because this is really just, it's not impacting the earnings, it's just like an information type code. For that, I would go under customize and set up an M code, which are like miscellaneous. So it's not going to impact anything else, any other wage boxes on the W-2. It's just going to be in there so that you can then link it onto the W-2. So I set M09 here for employer health. And again, I can go for this, I can either go, because this is a memo code that's not impacting anything else, I can either put it under load in edit year to date, or I can go back into load in pay history. Again, say yes to update the year to date. Click on edit, and go down to that M code and put the amount in there. And so it's up to you if you want to put just the employer portion in here, or if it's easier for you to pull the total amount, employer, you can put that amount in there as well. So it's up to you how you want to input that number. And once that number's in there, so if we go into our W2 screen, click under Other, and so the employer cost, the health coverage goes in box 12, so you can use either 12C or 12D. It's code DD, and then again you put the buckets where those values are sitting in. So if you only put the employer portion in under M07, then you would include the employee side as well in here. Or if it was a combined amount, I would just put in M07. Group term life also goes in box 12 with a code C. And again, you just put the deduction code or whatever code the value is sitting in on the right hand side. Right, so now we'll get into the W-2s. So you do need to order the W-2 forms. We line up with the 2 per page form, which is a standard laser form, and we also line up with a 4 per page form. Now with the 4 per page, there's different formats out there, so we only line up with this one specific one. So I definitely would recommend, if you want to get the 4 per page one. And when I say 4 per page, there's 4 W-2s on a page. It prints the same employee on each copy, because each copy is going to a different, one's going to the employee, one's going to the state, one's going to the local type of thing on there. But I would print that off even on blank paper, just so you can take it in and make sure you're getting the right form for those. So again, the forms, you can go online. There's greatland.com as an example of a site. You can order the forms for them. You can go to Staples generally to get the forms, so it really doesn't matter as long as you're getting the laser forms. The 4 per page one is this option here, number 4, and generally that's geared for people, businesses that are really just in one state, not so much multi-state, but just really one state locality situation for that. And then the 2 per page, generally you would choose option G here. And again, with the 2 per page, you just keep putting in each copy and you run the W-2s over and over for all the number of copies you have. So the system does never stop you from running W-2s. It never cuts it off, so you can always run the W-2s during the year, at the end of the year, whenever it may be. You'll always be able to run those forms. There are other options in here for printing, but again, the main ones are number 4, which again is the 4 per page one, option G, which is the 2 per page one, and also we do have option 2, which is also the 2 per page form, except that one will print the same employee on both forms. So there's kind of a specific 2 per page form that's geared to have both forms set for the same employee. But again, the most common one tends to be the one where it's prints employee A on the top, employee B on the bottom, and it's a 2 per page form, and that's this option G here. Now, if you've never run the W-2s in the system, in Jonas, definitely the first thing you want to do when you come into this screen is click on the Help button, as it'll tell you what each of the boxes are in this screen and what it's looking for. So you do need to specify any pre-tax deductions you've had during the year and what wage boxes they need to come out of. So for example, box 1 here, which is wages, tips, and other compensation, is telling you that if the employee's deduction is set to U, an F, or a Y, you need to list that deduction in the box 1 field. So you need to do that for box 1, 5, and 16, and 18 if you have local wages. Box 3 you do not need to do it for, Social Security wages, and that's because that is a one wage figure we do store in a bucket, so we're able to just pull that figure automatically on the W-2. Now when we're referring to the pre-tax rule, we're referring to if you go into the employee's file, Go into their deduction screen, and it's going to be what's set up here under pre-tax. So generally, excuse me, a health coverage is set to like a U or a Y, and a 401k IRA type plan is normally set to an F. So again, you need to update those codes. So keep in mind, when you're setting up the screen, you just say, okay, it'll save the settings. But you have to keep in mind during the year or the past year, if you added in new pre-tax deduction codes, that you come into the screen and update them on the screen as well, so that your wages show correctly. So again, on this screen here are all your wages. So box 1's your Social Security, box 5's your Medicare, 16 is your state, and 18 is your local wages. If we go to other, where we were before, this is all the other boxes on the W-2. So if you have a 401k or simple plan, you can specify it here. And then again, for all these fields, to the right, you just specify the codes where the value is sitting in. So box 12A is controlled up here, and then B, C, and D are controlled down here. So again, you can have 3 other items show on box 12. Again, a common one now is the employer health. C for the group term life. Another one, if you have a 401k Roth, that is code AA. So that would be set in there. You have a 125 plan, so that will show in box 14. So you don't really have to show this. Social Security or the IRS doesn't look at box 14, but if you want your employees to see the amount of their health deductions and dental and all that, you can check that flag and specify the code or codes that the value is sitting in. In box 14, you can also again have 3 other amounts shown there. So some people will have, for example, an auto. So again, as long as it's sitting in some earning code or bucket deduction or memo code, you just tell it where it is, and then it'll show on here. Again, all these codes you're specifying here don't tie to the wages on here. It's just controlling those specific boxes when you specify it in here. For states like New Jersey, we automatically show the employee portion of the SUI, the FLI, the SDI. For Ohio, we automatically show school tax in box 14, so you don't need to specify those in the screen. The system will know to print those amounts in there. If you have tips, you'd specify that here and specify the earning codes or codes that you have the tips set up in. Whether or not you check that, you want to keep it consistent with how you file your 941. So on your 941, if you break out the tips, then you want to break them out on the W-2. If you don't break them out on the 941, I wouldn't break them out on the W-2, because you're going to get a letter from the IRS saying that your quarterlies do not match your W-2s then. So you want to keep those things consistent. EIC payment doesn't really apply any longer at this point. Dependent care is box 10, and then we have allocated tips box 8, and non-qualified plans for box 11. So as mentioned, after you set the screen up, you want to make sure you say OK so it saves the settings, so that you don't have to keep entering them each time you come in. Another thing to keep in mind, when you come into this screen, it always defaults a year prior to the current year. So for example, right now my profile is set to 18, it's going to default to 17. Once January rolls around, I change my profile to 19, then this would automatically start defaulting to 18. But if I'm running these, at the end of the third quarter, I just have to manually change the year when I come into the screen. Once you have it set up, you can run the W-2 summary, which is just a summary report. You have an option to run it by employee code or surname and name. And this will just kind of give you a summary of what's going into each employee's boxes on the W-2. And you could have employees with multiple columns on here, depending on their setup. But the system will try to combine all those details when it comes to the filing at the end. One of the items you want to make sure when you're looking at this, though, definitely want to come to the total and look at all your wage boxes. And you want to make sure that your Social Security wages, and if you have tips, your Social Security tips, if you add those two together, they should match your Medicare wages, with the exception of people who reach the limit. So if the difference between those two is the same difference as those that have reached the limit for Social Security, then that's fine. But if anybody else has a difference, then you need to go fix that, because you can't have Social Security wages and Medicare wages be different on the W-2. So they need to be the same, again, unless you've reached the limit for the year. Also, you want to be able to take those federal numbers at the end of your W-2 summary, and then you should be able to take your 941 quarterly tax reports, add up the different fields on those reports, and you should be able to tie them to your W-2. So that's another check you want to do before you actually run the forms. And again, you can run the forms on blank paper. It'll let you run them as many times. So don't just come in, run them off, and send them out. You need to look them over, make sure everything is accurate on them before they get sent out. When you're ready to print the W-2s, you just say print W-2s, hit your printer. It will give you a warning if you haven't lined them up yet to maybe just choose a few employees to make sure the lineup is good, because you don't want to waste forms. And then at this point you can do a test pattern. Once you say no, it will print the W-2s off. Now with the 2 per page form, if the alignment's slightly off, at the point of this test pattern you have alignment options here. So you can choose, so let's say I want to pull the items to the left, the figures to the left, I'd make it a negative figure. If I want to push them to the right, I'd make it a positive. Vertically, if I want to push them down on the form, I do a positive. If I want to pull them up on the form, I'll do a negative. So usually with those modifiers, you can get them to line up pretty good on the actual forms themselves. With the 4 per page form, that one's excuse me, a little bit different as far as adjusting it, because that form takes up so much of the page. You can't really just adjust, shift everything down. And quite often what tends to happen with that form is that the top form may be good, but by the time it gets to the 4th form, it's off like a line or 2 lines type of thing. So when you're choosing the 4 per page form, what you can do is when you get to the point of the test pattern, if you say yes, it'll open this screen up here where you can excuse me, tell it where you want to start each form to print. So let's say the first 2 are fine, but the second one is off half a line. So I could change this to 47, and then the last one is off a whole line, so I would change this to 70.75. And usually with those, then you're able to get those forms also to line up, again, if it tends to creep down on the page. And then if you want to just set it back to the defaults, you just hit defaults, and it will go back to what the defaults are for it. I was mentioning about doing selected W-2s if you want to just test the alignment for a few people. So to do that, in the W-2 screen, you click on selected W-2s. You can do selected or range of employees. And then say OK. Now after you say OK, it doesn't print them. You still have to go ahead and hit print W-2s again. So you hit print W-2s, you go through the process, and then it will print out just those employees. If you're going to be sending paper copies to Social Security, you need to do a W-3 form. So we do have the option to print a W-3 grand total only. So again, ideally with that option, I would set it to option G for the form when you want to print the W-3. We do have a tab up here for contact info, so if you want to fill these details in so you don't have to manually put them on the form, you can do that. And again, you still hit print W-2s, but it's only going to print the total W-2. And that total W-2 will line up with the actual W-3 form. So you can print on blank paper first to check it, but then you can actually print it on the actual form itself. Excuse me. And then lastly, we have electronic filing. So to create the file, it's actually option P here, W2 magnetic media EFW2. So there, there is an option here as well for a text delimited file, but that is not, that is kind of a separate file. You wouldn't use this option to file for it with Social Security or with the various states. It's always going to be option P. So again, you choose option P, hit print W2s. You will get this message about AccuWage. So AccuWage is something that you can go online with Social Security before you upload your file and run it through AccuWage. And it'll spin through and look for any critical errors and let you know if there are any errors. So that way, if there are, you can go fix them before submitting your actual file. Generally, it will give you an error about the ID, the employer ID. That error can be ignored because you're filing yourself, so you don't have to worry about that error that comes up. But obviously, any critical errors, like if they say the Social Security wages are higher than the Medicare wages, you know you need to fix those before you create and submit the file. So you say OK to that. Takes you to this screen. You fill in all your details here. For the file name, if you just leave the file path blank, it'll generally save it to your local C drive in a folder called GJCWin and a folder called Data. You can also specify the path you want in here as well. And if it defaults to C:\\, you may get a message saying it can't define the file. And that's because a lot of computers now, the C drive is locked down. So in that case, like I said, either remove the path or give it a different path than just C:\. Generally, I recommend that you put the year into it just to differentiate it. As you go through, say OK. If you filled in the screen and you click OK, nothing happens, just go back up to the first field and just use the Enter key to go all the way down through it. And then you should get to the point here where it says OK to create the file. Then it's going to ask you to enter a state code. So if you're creating the file for Social Security, leave this blank because you want everybody in the file. But if you are creating it for the state, especially for multi-state, you would create a separate file for each state. You'd specify each state at this point, and then just those employees working in that state would be included in the file. You hit enter, it tells you it's been stored, and so then you're able to go grab that file, and like you say, you can go to Social Security, upload it to them, and run it through AccuWage, and then also submit it online with them. And again, the due date for that, it used to be the end of February and also the end of March if you're filing electronically, but now it's January 31st. So it's the same date as your employees' W-2s are due that you also have to submit with Social Security. And again, just if we needed to create a file for the state, you would just choose the same option. Come back in here, but then I would put in the state code in the file name again just to keep it separate. And then in this case I would enter the state code because I just want employees who worked in that state. If you do have multiple payrolls and you want to combine them into one file, you can do that, but the only caveat is that all your deductions have to be consistent between the payrolls, especially the pre-tax deductions. If garnishment is different, that doesn't matter. But any 401k, cafeteria, health, dental, they need to be exactly the same between all the payrolls for you to combine them into a payroll. And how you would do is you would just check this flag here to include employees from all payrolls. Like it says, you need to make sure that your data is consistent. You also have to make sure you don't have a dummy payroll code out there that has year-to-date data in it. And then, so you can use that option when printing the W-2s and also when you create the file for Social Security or the state. Okay, so now we'll talk about starting off your new year in Jonas. So the main thing you need to do for that is you need to get the payroll changes for the new year. So they're usually available around the third week of December. And basically, you just need to go on the support website. There'll be a payroll only option, or if your version option is up there, you can do the version to get a full update as well. All the payroll changes that are in the payroll only would also be in the version update itself. If you're doing the payroll only, it does not change your release number. So just to keep that in mind, because it's a partial update, you will not see your release number change when you do a payroll only update. Then as far as your setup in your profile, your main thing is to come in and change your taxation year here. So basically, as soon as you're done the last pay of the year that you're going to pay in that year, you should come and change your profile to the new year so that the next time you set up that profile or the next time you set up a pay period, it's going to default to that tax year because it's the taxation year that controls what year it goes on the W-2s and what tax tables it accesses. And if you have a payroll that's paid at the end of December, pay ending at the end of December, but your check date is going to fall, or your deposit date is going to fall in January, that needs to be considered part of the new year's W-2s. You can't have it be part of the prior year's W-2s because then your 941s are not going to tie to it. So even though the whole period was worked in the prior year, because the deposit date falls in the new year, the check date in the new year, you have to consider it part of the new year's W-2s. You will get a message for any pay periods you set up at the start of it from the end of December to January 15th. Again, just reiterating that information that to make sure that it's set to the correct tax year because you need again your taxation year on this screen, this field here needs to mirror what your check date is going to be on that pay period. So the payroll update will contain the majority of the tax table changes, so anything to do with FUTA, Social Security, Medicare, federal withholding, state withholding. The only exceptions are, as far as withholding, would be your city or school taxes. So if you had changes in those would have to be updated manually under here. And for Maryland, they have their county taxes combined with the state tax, but you would have to come in here if any of the counties withholding percentages changed. You would have to come in here and dictate that, okay, this one is now 3.06 if it applied to that county. So Maryland does have one extra step in that they do have to come in here and update any of their county rules if any of the percentages change for those counties. But other than that, what's being updated here is your local tax rates. In your payroll profile, you do need to update your state unemployment and state disability information. So that gets done under payroll profile and SWHSUI. If you have multiple profiles, you should update it in all of them. Even if the very first profile you're not using anymore, you should still update the information in that profile. And basically, you just come in here, specify what the wage base is if it's changed, and also if there's employer-employer percentage rate change, you'd put that in here as well. And then your state disability information is down here in the bottom right-hand corner. The FUTA rate is generally 0.6. There was a few years where certain states had a higher rate, but now it is back to 0.6% pretty much across the board. One thing about changing the state unemployment information, you ideally want to change it after you've run the fourth quarter unemployment file or unemployment reports. But if it's the case where you had to start processing your New Year's payroll and then you need to go back and run the fourth quarter after the fact, you do have to come back into this screen and change the figures back to the prior year, create your file or your report, and then change it back one last time to the New Year's figures. And then lastly, for workers' comp, if you're tracking workers' comp in the system, That gets updated under payroll configuration and workers' comp codes. So you would just come in here, choose your unclassified code or your actual workers' rate code you set up, and update the rate in there. And again, ideally you want to change those rates after you've run your workers' comp report so that you don't have to change them back should you have to go back to the prior year to run them. So that wraps up our year-end processing webinar on the payroll. As mentioned, there is also additional webinars on 1099 year-end reporting and also on 1094, 1095C reporting. Thank you for listening.